This is Chris McKaylee, and in this video podcast, I wanted to discuss what I call the second bill introduction deadline. Some call it the real intro deadline. How can there actually be a second bill introduction deadline in the California legislature? There really isn't one, but there is a deadline following the bill introduction deadline for getting substantive amendments into intent or spot bills, the placeholder bills. As a result, there is effectively a second bill introduction deadline because you can see what will become of those currently non-substantive bills that were introduced roughly the third Friday in February by that deadline. For example, in the 2022 California legislative session, Friday, February 18th was the deadline to introduce bills. Now, committee bills are not subject to that deadline, and so there are certainly 20 or 30 additional bills that get introduced after that deadline. Now, of the just over 2,000 bills introduced in the 2022 session between the two houses, the Assembly and Senate, basically 32% of them were either intent or spot bills. So a third of all the introduced bills lacked any substantive language upon their introduction. Now, under the rules of the state Senate and the state Assembly, intent and spot bills will be held in their respective rules committees and will not be referred to a policy committee unless substantive language is amended in. So as a result of this, the two houses of the California legislature require bills to be amended with substantive language in order for those spot or intent bills to be referred to a standing committee. And in order to ensure that these amended bills get referred and heard in the policy committees in a timely fashion, both houses institute an additional deadline for amending these spot and intent bills. So in the 2022 session, the first deadline was for submitting proposed amendments to the Office of Legislative Counsel for drafting, which was March 1, 2022. The Assembly then specified March 14th as its deadline for submitting those amendments to spot and intent bills to the Assembly Committee on Rules for processing. And the Senate specified March 16th as its deadline for getting those proposed amendments into the placeholder bills that was in the Senate Committee on Rules. Now, how do the two houses handle the processing of these amendments? This is an important point because many believe that when amendments to spot or intent bills were not in print, publicly available on the website or in the bill room of the Capitol, that they had failed to get amended and therefore were not moving forward. And this is a common misunderstanding, but unfortunately it is a misunderstanding. So basically, the deadlines in the Assembly and the Senate were for the authors of those bills to submit their amendments to the respective rules committees. And so the Assembly and Senate rules committees process these amendments differently, which also explains why the amended bills often appear in print at later times. So what's the difference between the two? The Senate Rules Committee processes the amendments, puts them into print, and then refers the bills to their respective standing committees. The Assembly Rules Committee, on the other hand, refers the bills as proposed to be amended to the relevant standing committee, and then those standing committees actually process the amendments. As a result, it could be several days after those March amendment deadlines before you start seeing the amended spot and intent bills actually in print.